They say empathy is the purest form of love. But in the wrong hands, it becomes something else, a blade made of kindness. A weapon that doesn't pierce flesh, but dismantles certainty. You see, when a man is strong, truly strong, it's not his muscles that protect him. It's his detachment, his calm, his ability to stay unshaken while the world trembles around him. But there's one force that can walk past that armor without a single fight: empathy. Not the shallow kind people throw around on social media. Not the "I understand" cliches whispered in moments of convenience. I'm talking about the deep, surgical empathy of a mature woman. The one who's lived, lost, and learned. The woman who's seen men break, and knows exactly where the cracks hide. When she looks at you, she doesn't see the confident man you show the world. She sees the quiet boy beneath the armor. The one who never got comforted. The one who learned early that to survive, he had to control his emotions. And she whispers, "You can trust me." That's how it begins. Empathy, when used consciously, is not just compassion. It's access. It opens doors no seduction ever could. It bypasses lust, logic, and pride, reaching the part of a man that even he doesn't understand. Because the truth is, men crave empathy more than sex, more than admiration, even more than love. They crave to be seen, not for what they do, but for who they are when they're not performing. And a mature woman knows that. She's spent decades observing. She's seen the patterns. She knows how validation works, how silence speaks, and how timing breaks defenses. So when she listens, truly listens, it feels like salvation. She doesn't fight your ego. She studies it. She doesn't challenge your strength. She softly leans into it until it folds. She doesn't seduce your body. She seduces your safety. And suddenly, you're disarmed. You start confessing things you've never said aloud. You reveal thoughts you didn't even know were still alive inside you. And while you think you're connecting, what's really happening is a quiet reprogramming. Because empathy, in its darker form, doesn't just understand you, it reshapes you. She learns your emotional triggers, your fears, your ideals of love, your hidden guilt. And once she knows them, she becomes irreplaceable. You'll begin to feel like no one else could possibly get you the way she does. That's the trap. Empathy creates dependency. You stop thinking clearly because you mistake understanding for alignment. You think, she understands me, therefore she must love me. But empathy doesn't always come from love. Sometimes it comes from power, from curiosity, from the quiet satisfaction of knowing how to reach a man who thought he couldn't be reached. Mature women, especially those who've been hurt, don't seek control in obvious ways. They don't raise their voices. They don't argue. They disarm. They use empathy as the softest form of dominance, a way to make a strong man surrender willingly. And that's the most dangerous kind of influence, the one that doesn't feel like control. Because when a woman makes a man open his soul through empathy, she's not just touching his emotions, she's rewriting his identity. And once that happens, he's no longer choosing her. He's orbiting her. That's the hidden psychology behind why mature women can dismantle the strongest men. Not through manipulation in the crude sense, but through emotional precision. Empathy becomes the quiet scalpel that cuts through pride and leaves the heart exposed. And the man, in his confusion, mistakes that exposure for love, when it's really power disguised as care. That's the forbidden truth no one wants to admit. Empathy can be the most seductive and the most dangerous form of control. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Daniel, 43, a builder of his own world. He had the kind of quiet strength that comes from discipline, early mornings, clean boundaries, no emotional chaos. He'd been through enough heartbreak to know what not to trust. Or at least, he thought he had. Then he met her, Elena, mid-40s, calm, soft-spoken, with a voice that carried the weight of someone who had seen both beauty and ruin. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't flirt. She simply listened. And that's what made him lower his guard. One night, after a long talk, she said something simple. "I can feel how tired your soul is." That's all it took. That single sentence, the kind no young woman would ever think to say, cut through his armor like silence in a crowded room. She didn't compliment his strength. She acknowledged his fatigue. She saw the man behind the effort. From that night on, Daniel felt something shift. He began to crave her presence, not for excitement, but for peace. He found himself revealing things, his regrets, his fears, the moments he wished he could redo. And every time he did, she nodded, not judging, not fixing, just absorbing. That's the trap of mature empathy. It makes you feel like home has returned. But what Daniel didn't see was how she used every confession to map his psychology. She learned what he feared most: emotional abandonment. She learned how much he valued loyalty, and how easily guilt could be used against him. She learned that he would rather stay in pain than feel like he failed someone he cared about. So months later, when she began withdrawing her attention, slowly, deliberately, he fell apart. Not because she left, but because he didn't understand why. He couldn't accept it. He was addicted to being understood. He had mistaken empathy for emotional safety, and when she took it away, it felt like losing air. That's how a strong man collapses, not through rejection, but through the absence of connection. Another story. A therapist I once knew, brilliant, intuitive, told me something unforgettable. She said, "The most dangerous kind of empathy is when it's used to make someone depend on you for their sense of peace." She had seen it in relationships between older women and younger men, a dynamic built not on lust, but on emotional control. The woman plays the healer. The man, the wounded soul. At first, it feels sacred, as if the universe has finally sent someone who gets it. But underneath, there's always an unspoken exchange. I'll understand you better than anyone, and in return, you'll need me more than you should. Empathy becomes a currency of control. And most men don't even see it happening. They think they're in a mature relationship. They call it deep connection. But if you look closer, you'll notice the subtle shifts. He stops questioning her. He starts defending her, even when she's wrong. He silences his intuition, because, she understands me, she must know better. That's not love. That's dependency dressed as intimacy. There's a reason mature women often master this form of psychological persuasion. They've lived long enough to see how emotions steer behavior. They've watched men fall apart, husbands, lovers, fathers, and they've studied the anatomy of collapse. Empathy, for them, isn't just compassion. It's insight. And insight is power. A younger woman might try to control a man with beauty or validation. But a mature woman? She controls with resonance. She knows that when a man feels seen, he will open doors in himself that he never lets anyone near. And once that door is open, she decides how far he falls. Think of Marcus, another example. A corporate leader. Stoic, rational, untouchable. He met a woman named Claire through work. Mid-50s, graceful, divorced. She never flirted, she simply understood. When others argued, she stayed quiet. When he vented, she said, "I get why you'd feel that way." That phrase became a drug. Months passed, and Marcus, a man who prided himself on logic, began to check his phone, waiting for her messages. When she was silent, he couldn't focus. When she responded, his body relaxed. She had become his emotional regulator, without ever asking for it. That's the secret. Empathy makes you believe you found balance, but often, you've just relocated your center into someone else's hands. And by the time you notice, it's too late. Empathy isn't evil. It's sacred, but sacred things become dangerous when used without conscience. Mature women don't all weaponize it, but the ones who do it so subtly that even psychologists fall for it. They make you feel safe enough to surrender, then shift the gravity around you until your strength serves their emotional agenda. And the man, who once stood unshakable, becomes dependent on her understanding the way a drowning man depends on air. That's not love. That's a transfer of power. There's a moment every strong man remembers, that exact second when he realizes he's not in control anymore. Not of her. Not of himself. It doesn't happen with shouting, or betrayal, or drama. It happens in silence. The kind of silence that feels like standing in a room where the air has been taken away. He starts to sense it when he hesitates before speaking, when he filters his thoughts to avoid disappointing her, when he notices that her moods dictate his peace. That's when empathy becomes invisible power, because it's no longer about what she says, but what she feels. And he starts living not for truth, but for her approval. The man who once built his world on logic now reads emotional weather patterns. He studies her tone. He adjusts his behavior, hoping to keep the connection steady. And in doing so, he forgets the sound of his own instincts. This is what emotional disarmament looks like, not a battle, but a slow surrender. She doesn't conquer him with demands. She conquers him by making him want to please her. She has rewritten his emotional code. Empathy can be the most elegant form of psychological warfare, because it never feels like war. It feels like understanding. It feels like peace. Until you realize the peace only exists when she's happy. The strong man, who once swore he'd never lose himself for anyone, becomes obsessed with restoring harmony. He apologizes for things he didn't do. He suppresses the part of him that questions her motives. He starts to justify her coldness as, she's just tired. And when she pulls away, he blames himself. He doesn't see that she's conditioning him. Every time she withdraws, he chases. Every time she returns, he feels rewarded. Empathy becomes a cycle, a loop that teaches him that connection must be earned. That love must be maintained through emotional obedience. The tragedy is, he doesn't even resent her. He adores her. He believes she's the only one who ever understood him, the only one who saw through the facade. And maybe she did. But seeing through a man and saving him are two very different things. She saw his core, but instead of nurturing it, she built her influence around it. She became the mirror through which he viewed his worth. And when you depend on another person's empathy to validate your soul, you're no longer free. You're owned. I've watched men like this in therapy. Men who've led empires, companies, teams, broken down by one woman's silence. And it's not because they're weak. It's because they've spent their lives being strong. And when someone finally understands them, they mistake that relief for truth. Empathy feels like healing, until you realize it's also hypnosis. The moment she says, "I know what you're feeling," he stops trusting his own emotions. He begins to defer, to agree, to adapt. Because deep down, he believes she knows him better than he knows himself. That's the turning point, when a man gives up the right to interpret his own pain. And she, the mature woman, often doesn't see herself as manipulative. She tells herself, "I'm just being understanding. I'm just caring for him." But deep down, she feels the power shift. She knows he listens to her tone before his own reason. She knows he can't detach, even when he tries. And that knowledge, that quiet, intoxicating knowledge, becomes addictive. It's not dominance in the obvious sense. It's the thrill of influence. The subtle awareness that she holds the emotional remote to a man who was once unshakable. That's what empathy can do when it slips from compassion into control. It's not manipulation by design, it's manipulation by instinct. The psychology of a woman who's learned that softness can move mountains faster than force. And the man, he doesn't notice his identity eroding. He just feels tired, drained, confused. He starts to lose interest in his passions. He second-guesses decisions that once came easily. He avoids conflict, because keeping her calm has become his new mission. And one day, he wakes up and doesn't recognize the person staring back at him. Not because she destroyed him, but because he gave everything sacred inside him to be understood. That's the cruel paradox. The same empathy that heals wounds can also erase the self. Because being understood is the most intoxicating drug a man can ever taste. And like all drugs, the first hit feels like heaven. The last one feels like loss. The The strong man falls, not when he is defeated, but when he is seen too deeply by someone who uses that sight to control, rather than to love. There's a strange irony in human nature. The very thing that connects us is also what can destroy us. Empathy, the most divine trait we possess, becomes the most dangerous when mixed with desire. Because the moment you want someone to understand you, you give them the map to your heart. And whoever holds that map doesn't need to fight you, they just need to read you. Strong men fall not because they are weak, but because they forget that being understood is not the same as being loved. One soothes the mind, the other tests the soul. And most men, after years of carrying their burdens alone, can no longer tell the difference. There's a deep hunger in the masculine heart that few ever admit, the longing to be seen without needing to explain. That's why empathy feels like oxygen. When a woman looks at him and says, "I understand," he feels, perhaps for the first time, that he's not performing. He's simply being. But that's also when he becomes most vulnerable. Because when someone else gives you peace, they can also take it away. Empathy is not neutral. It's a bridge, and every bridge carries power. Whoever controls the bridge decides who crosses and who doesn't. A mature woman, especially one who has lived through betrayal, learns this truth not intellectually, but emotionally. She learns that people open up when they feel seen, and they obey when they feel safe. She learns that empathy can move men in ways logic never could. And so, some use it as art, others as armor, and a few as quiet control. But this is not about villainy. This is about instinct. The human psyche has a deep, ancient drive, connection as survival. For women, empathy often becomes the strategy. For men, strength becomes the shield. And when those two forces meet, one always yields to the other. The strong man believes his strength will protect him. But empathy doesn't fight strength. It softens it. It dissolves it like water erodes stone, slowly, gently, persistently. He doesn't even feel it happening. One day he's proud of his independence. The next, he can't make a decision without wondering how she'll feel about it. He thinks he's growing closer, but he's actually disappearing. You see, empathy is not just an emotion. It's a form of access. And when a woman gains access to your emotional landscape, she can alter your weather without you ever realizing it. She can make you feel peace or panic, belonging or distance, all through the smallest gestures, the subtlest silences. That's why men who pride themselves on control often lose it through intimacy. Because you can't protect yourself from what feels good. When a mature woman listens, truly listens, she's not only hearing your words. She's watching your eyes, your breath, your pauses. She feels your rhythm and mirrors it back until you start to synchronize. And that's when the bond forms. That's when she becomes indispensable. It's not sorcery. It's psychology. Neural mirroring, emotional calibration, the invisible science of empathy. But what science can't explain is the moral choice behind it. What happens when someone uses understanding, not to heal, but to possess? That's where the shadow begins. Most people think manipulation is loud, dramatic, or deceitful. But the most profound manipulations happen in quiet moments, when care becomes control, and love becomes leverage. The mature woman doesn't need to lie, she just needs to listen in a way that makes you believe she's the only one who ever truly has. And once you believe that, you'll forgive anything. You'll ignore red flags. You'll rationalize her distance. You'll bend your boundaries, because you fear losing the connection more than losing yourself. That's the ultimate psychological reversal. The strong man becomes dependent on what once made him powerful, his emotional restraint. He learns to suppress discomfort for the sake of peace, not realizing that this peace is bought with self-erasure. It's tragic, but it's also deeply human. Because every man wants to be understood, and every woman wants to be felt. Empathy is where those two desires meet, and sometimes, where they destroy each other. So what's the way out? Not withdrawal. Not cynicism. But awareness. A man must understand that being understood is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. When someone sees you deeply, you owe it to yourself to stay conscious. To ask, Am I sharing this because it's truth, or because I crave relief? Am I connecting, or am I escaping loneliness? Empathy is beautiful, but it's not pure. It carries the fingerprints of power, longing, and fear. And the moment you start confusing empathy with love, you've already surrendered something sacred, your autonomy. True empathy does not seek to own. True love does not need understanding as a form of leverage. The moment empathy becomes a means to control how another person feels, it stops being light and starts becoming shadow. Think of this: a candle gives light, but also consumes itself in the process. Empathy is the same. It can illuminate the darkest parts of a soul, or burn through everything that made that soul whole. Mature women, in their complexity, know this duality intimately. Some use it to nurture, to raise men higher than they've ever stood. Others, unconsciously or not, use it to make men kneel. And the difference between the two lies in one quiet intention. Do I want to understand him to heal him, or to hold him? That's the moral line. And most never notice when it's crossed. The truth is, empathy is not just a feeling. It's a form of power. And like all power, it tempts. The temptation to guide, to influence, to make someone feel seen in exchange for control. But empathy, when it matures beyond desire, becomes something else entirely: detached compassion. It sees without taking. It understands without rewriting. It listens without shaping. That's the empathy that frees rather than binds. That's the empathy that builds rather than conquers. Until then, we live in a world where even kindness has shadows, and where the strongest men can be undone not by cruelty, but by care. Because in the end, the sharpest blade isn't hatred. It's the gentle voice that says, "I understand," while quietly rearranging who you are inside. That's the paradox of mature empathy. It heals, it haunts, and sometimes, it conquers. The wise man doesn't run from it, he respects it. He learns that understanding isn't always innocence, and that the moment you give someone the power to see your soul, you must also give yourself the courage to keep it your own. That's how you stay strong, not by resisting empathy, but by remembering that no matter who sees you, you still belong to yourself.